When we talk about prison, the first thing that usually comes up is crime, punishment, statistics, or violence. But we don't often stop and ask, well, what does redemption really look like? What does it mean to transform? Have we given up on a group of individuals that we didn't even give a chance to in the beginning? My guest today, Andrew Murphy, is the executive director of Wisconsin Inmate Education Association. His journey started with sitting in a room where he saw these men who were formerly incarcerated, where he had a perception that he was there to teach them, but instead learned himself that these human beings are capable of growth. They're capable of faith. They're capable of resilience and transformation. And that moment sparked his mission to continue to build education programs inside of Wisconsin prisons, helping these men earn degrees, strengthen their faith, and create new possibilities for their lives. In fact, it's because of programs like the Wisconsin Inmate Education Association that prison violence has actually reduced. Right now, Andrew is leading WIEA in a pivotal moment. As students in the Wisconsin prisons are coming back to school and going into these programs, they're renewing their faith in themselves. Through WIA, men are earning degrees. They're sharing what they learn, and they're changing the communities from the inside out. So here's something incredible. Every gift that's given in September to Wisconsin Inmate Education Association is being matched. That means that your generosity goes twice as far, opening more classrooms, reaching more students, and changing more lives. I've had a chance to actually meet Andrew, known him for about a year and a half now, gone to Wisconsin, and intimately actually seen the transformation. And I'm so excited because today we share some of the stories of these real men who have completely shifted who they are, how they see themselves. And we go deep into the myths that we carry about incarceration, why reform often misses the mark, and why education is one of the most powerful tools for redemption and justice. So I hope you listen and dive into this conversation because what Andrew shares with us is truly remarkable at what their organization is doing today. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives, the podcast where we challenge traditional thinking and explore the power of empathy in conscious leadership, personal growth, and human connection. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and in each episode, we dive into thought-provoking conversations that expand perspectives and spark transformation. Because empathy reframes perspectives. Let's begin. Andrew, I am so excited. This conversation has been coming for like a year, but I'm
Here we
so
are.
excited that we waited for as long as we did because in this last year and a half, like I have gotten to know you, the organization. I have gotten to meet some of the guys that have been impacted because of the organization. I mean, coming out to Wisconsin in February and just being able to see everything with my own eyes, like it just transformed everything. I mean, you introduced me to Adam, where we had him on our podcast and who shared some just incredible transformations that he's gone through. So this has just been something I am just so giddy about.
I'm excited to be here. Like you said, we've had so many conversations off screen, off recording, whatever. And so it's like, yeah, like you said, here we are, finally.
So we're going to talk about everything related to prison reform, justice, education, redemption. But before we get into that, there is something, and I actually wrote it down so I wouldn't forget exactly what you said. Your purpose is to ensure that nobody feels too broken to be redeemed. Can you take us back to the moment that conviction first became personal for you?
Mm. You know, I don't know if I have a set moment, but I would say that when it comes to the connection between those who have been incarcerated and that feeling of being too far gone, I can think back to it was a Bible study that I went to for guys coming out of prison. And I listened to I came in with this mindset that I had something to teach these guys because they've been incarcerated, some of them longer than I've been alive. And so in my mind, I'm thinking that I have things to teach them because I've been out in the world. I've been taking in all the stimuluses and information that's out there. And so I'm like, man, I got to teach these guys because in my mind, they couldn't possibly have something to teach me, which was beyond arrogant for me. But I walked into the room and I listened to these guys, some of them incarcerated, like I said, longer than I've been alive. And what I came to realize was that they had more to teach me than I had to teach them. And when it got to be my turn to share, I was in tears because I said, I don't have anything to offer. And I told them that I felt guilty that I didn't sit behind bars for 30 or 40 years and receive the transformations that they were talking about and the life change that they were experiencing. I was just sitting here walking in the door, and I don't feel like I earned the right to sit in the room and hear what they had to say. I felt like I had to do something in order to receive that. And so hearing them talk about the things that they had done that got them incarcerated, whatever it might be, I don't know. I don't know what they did. I don't know what brought them there. And yet I just saw them as equals, as another human being. And that's the way I approached the conversation. And so as I had more conversations outside of that, I started to realize the stigmas that so often around those who are incarcerated, and that often there's this feeling of like, well, they're locked up, like throw away the key and forget about them, instead of there's life change happening right there behind bars. It's not like their life goes on hold and then they get out and you just pick up where you left off. There's this transformation that can happen right there while they're behind bars.
I remember in February, you took me to one of those experiences. It happens on a Wednesday night or Tuesday night. And we went in and we sat there, and everyone is welcome. There, the level of compassion that was in that space, I can say, even with all the empathy work that I do, that was just a level that I had not experienced. You know, it was seeing these men, women who were behind bars, who are starting over, and they're welcoming every single person, right? If they just got out a week ago or they've been coming for 10 years to this space where they get to share gratitude. And what was so beautiful, and still till today, I feel it, is that it didn't matter how small the action was or how big it was, but every single thing got a moment of celebration. It was
Mm.
recognizing that for that person, being able to go and get their driver's license was a massive deal. It was a big deal. And the level of acceptance that they have, the level of recognition. And to your point, no one in there talked about, you know, what got them there, you know, what crimes they committed, because the idea was not about tying you to this identity of who you were. It's about who you're becoming. And I will say, and I remember saying this to you when we left that, and you asked me, like, so how was that? And I just remember saying that, wow, I don't think that anyone who has been outside and hasn't gone to, and not that I'm advocating for people to go in, but there is a level of just entitlement. And like you said, like that arrogance that you also went in with, that I have something to teach you,
Hmm.
that we have that they just don't.
Yeah. And there's an element of like we look at the prison system like it's this like silo that's insulated from the world, that like no way there's things from the outside that are making their way in, or let alone there's things that are happening in there that translate to me out here. And I think that's been the most eye-opening thing for me, is that I have so much to learn. My dad has a quote that I have in a frame that says we have so much to learn from those who we think, or who have so much, who have less than us. And it's that same mindset of, you know, you might assume that, well, this person has been incarcerated for 30 years. Surely I have more to teach them than they have to teach me. And I think this just kind of flips it on its head. And I continue to step into those spaces with a humility that says, listen first before you ever think that you have anything to offer, because you might find that they have more to teach you.
It's that thinking where we, you know, as humans, we have this hierarchical positioning. And so we see that if someone is in prison, if someone is incarcerated, like you said, toss the keys and that's it. And we have this idea of out of sight, out of mind. At least I don't have to be uncomfortable with anything that's going on because I don't need to be a part of that. What we make a lot of judgments about them. We make a lot of judgments as if they aren't human. What would you say are some myths that we need to debunk when it comes to understanding the people that are in prison, who end up in prison, their journey of who they are as a human being?
Yeah. I would say that, well, there's two. One would be a story that the question that, as we talk through our students, the freshmen coming in, our dean of students, Pastor Robin Knoll, he does an exercise where he goes around the room and he looks at each new student in the eyes, like pretty close. And it makes them a little uncomfortable at first because they're like, why is this guy staring at me in the face? I mean, we're talking about a prison environment. Normally that doesn't lead to good things. But he goes by and he looks at each individual in the eyes. And then afterwards, he goes up and addresses everybody. And he said, have you noticed what I've been doing? And someone will, pipe up and say, yeah, you've been staring into our eyes. And he goes, do you know why I do that? And he says, no. And because he goes, I want you to know that every pair of eyes that I've looked into and that you look into belongs to somebody made in the image of God and valued and is loved. And there's men who weep at that because for so much of their experience, depending on how long they've been incarcerated, that sense of dignity isn't often felt. And so there's this myth that like they're gone, out of sight, out of mind, like you said. And yet reality is that they're human beings that need to be seen, loved, and valued, just like all of us. And so, I mean, that's just one myth. But the other is that while they're incarcerated, there's this idea that they can't possibly be influencing the world out here. And I think there's a misconception that, like, I don't hear this critique often when it comes to our program, but people are like, why would I give to a program for guys who are incarcerated who may never come back to our community? I would rather support causes out here in the community that are like directly engaged in, nonviolence and all that kinds of things. And I explained to him is, yes, some of our students may not return home, but they sit next to people who will come back to your community. And through the course of their 4-year education, they're learning about things like trauma, family dynamics, PTSD, human value and worth from a biblical perspective. And those truths translate to people that come back to the community. And they have family members in our community. And so if you care about crime and different issues within the community, there's this like, I talk about like we're going kind of around the back door. Like people want to address it head on in the front, which we need people that are doing that. But we've also got to address the place that these guys go for decades upon decades. And what happens to them when they're there? Are they treated with dignity and respect? Are they released with this life that then can be translated to others? And that's kind of the push I always give to say, like, it matters. It matters what happens to these guys while they're incarcerated. And our program is one of those ways that we try to bring value and dignity to these men to transform others.
Let's actually take a step back and let's have you share what your organization does and why it's so powerful for, when we talk about education and we talk about reform and we talk about these men that are receiving the education they're getting. But let's take a step back so listeners know what exactly your mission is.
Yep. So the organization that I'm executive director of is the Wisconsin Inmate Education Association. And what we do is we operate in partnership with reputable college, Trinity International University, and the Department of Corrections to provide a bachelor's degree in biblical studies with a minor in psychology. And it's a fully accredited bachelor's degree. It's the same degree anybody out here that would be going to the college would receive. And over the course of that process, I explain that there's a sense of like you bring education, which is extremely important. But if you don't think that you matter, if you don't think that you have value and worth, I think you're missing something. And for us, the biblical perspective, that biblical education, that major is the undercurrent that kind of moves everything along. That's you have dignity, value, and worth. And we do it through that biblical major. And the goal is that they experience transformation in their own life that then can ripple out to other men that they're interacting with within the prison system, as well as their families, and then ultimately the community.
I remember when I came into Wisconsin in February and we met one of the men that had gone through the program. And he's out now and he's a productive part of society and it's fantastic. And hearing his stories were just so powerful because one of the things that I think people miss is there's this concept of, like you said earlier, like, why do we have to provide education to someone that's internal? Like, who cares? They need to serve their crime. They're monsters, right? So we objectify them, we dehumanize them because then it's easier for us to not care about them if we've dehumanized someone. And with your program, one of the things that it also does help with is reducing prison violence. Because from what I understand and from what I was told is that to your point, it's like this, it's a legitimate degree. It is the credentials. The courses are not watered down. It is exactly what anyone else would get. But on top of that, there is some rigorous rules around what keeps you qualified to stay in the program. And that is, you're not allowed to get into fights. You're not allowed to interfere in someone else's. If someone is trying to create a trigger, a reaction, the goal is to not respond to that reaction. So you really are teaching things that we on the outside still struggle with, right? Like that
Yeah.
emotional response, emotional reaction. And so,
I have a story around that
yes,
actually.
please share.
So I was sitting down with our psychology professor. So the education isn't online, so it's all in person. So professors come into the prison to do all of the lectures, everything. And our psychology professor was sharing with me that she was doing her lesson, and there were two gentlemen who got into an argument. And these two gentlemen stood up at one point, and things were looking like they were going to get heated. And she, in a moment, was like, what am I supposed to do? And she kind of looked at the guard, like side eye, like, and the guard was kind of looking at her, and she's like, I'm the professor. I should be the one who's going to handle this. And so she said a short prayer, and then she walked over to these men and she asked them to sit down. And they responded and they sat down and they went their separate ways. But afterwards, the gentleman, there was one who kind of initiated the altercation or the argument, and then this other guy. The one who was engaging in it comes up to her after and he says, I just want to tell you, he said, as African American men, he said that it's not common for us, if you're faced with an argument, he's like, you don't back down. You just don't back down. You either escalate or there's only, that's really the only option. And he said that what you showed me there's another way to de-escalate a situation, and there is an option to walk away. And I think obviously those tendencies that he was describing are heightened in a prison environment where you have this, just everybody's kind of on their own and it's tense. But he said, you showed me a different way. And I think that's that example of it's modeling to these guys there's other ways to handle situations. And that psychology minor for so many of the guys describe, like, as they're talking about like addiction and trauma, they're like kind of doing a self-reflection. They're like, oh, that's what I was just angry. But it's like, no, it was deeper than that. You were hurt. You experienced trauma. You experienced rejection. It gives them a greater vocabulary for their experience that they already had. They just didn't have words to put to it. And I think that psychology minor, it changes it for so many of the guys to bring it all home.
One of the most powerful stories, I remember you told me, and I want you to share it because you share it so beautifully, is about the two rival gang members.
Mm. Yes, yes. There was two men. One was from the Gangster Disciples, and the other was from the Vice Lords, which are two opposing gangs. And they come into the program, and their only requirement is it's behavioral requirements and academic requirements. There's no other bar for that. And so you've got people from varieties of walks within the prison system and cliques and groups that come into the classroom. And what's beautiful is those they have to be put aside because you're all there for the same goal. And these two men who, on the outside, because of their gang affiliations, would have ended the other one's life just because of who they represented. But here in the classroom, one of the students pulls our dean of students aside and asks if he can go up on the board and write on the board. And he goes up on the board and he writes LV or VL for Vice Lords, but he flips the initials around, and then he writes GD for Gangster Disciples. Leaves a space between both of those letters. And then he starts talking as he's writing, and he puts an O, and he says, out on the outside, I would have killed that man for who he stood with. But here in this classroom, he said, what unites us, as he's writing in the middle of it, is he writes an O, which is love and God. And he said, that is what unites us, and we have to work together to continue through this journey and to finish what we started.
Every single time you share that, I mean, I've heard the story like 3 times or more than that, but every single time, I think this is what people really need to understand is just the power of personal transformation, the power of education. And more than anything, it's the fact that you have a program and you have individuals that are going in, these professors, who are not treating them as a gang member, as all the things that they have as protective layers to protect themselves when they're in their cells or whatever it is. But in this classroom, they also get called by their name. They
Yes.
they don't get called by the digits that are associated with who they are. And that in itself is so powerful because for so many, it's like the minute you get into that prison system and you have a number now, a 6-digit number, that is your identity. They're erasing who you are. You are no longer Andrew. You're no longer Mike. You're no longer Robert.
Hmm.
But in that
And
classroom, you are.
and one of the things that Robert, actually, I talked with him just recently, and he shared that one of the professors said that he told them, the freshman, he said, when you graduate, we're colleagues. He said, you're my colleague. And it's like, he said, in prison, you're under this realization, there's an authoritative, like, differential. People in authority are above you. If you're there and you're in prison and you're incarcerated, you're beneath them. And he said, for them walking in the door, for a person of authority to see you as an equal, to greet you with a handshake, a good morning, a how are you, and call you Mr. Smith, whatever it is, that's dignifying. And he called it dignified pride that he experienced when he was in the program. And that's the thing where it's like, if you believe that you have value and worth, you're going to operate very differently in the world than if you think you're garbage and nobody cares about you. And I think that's a lot of what happens in the program for the guys.
That piece of dignity that they get where they realize that they are more, that they can release their. Adam talks about how he released his gang identity and how he recognized he is more than that, that he has purpose. I remember you shared another story. There's just gonna be so many stories, by the way, because
Tons.
there's tons of reasons that just show how powerful education can be to helping someone see what, the choices that they have in life and what they can do even when they are within the system. You shared a story about, or Robert did, about a man who took on the role of a janitorial services and others were making fun of him. I'd love for you to share that.
I have that story and I have an update to that story, which brings it home in a
Oh, yes.
powerful.
Bring it home.
So Robert had recently graduated
And
from
FYI, Robert is a former
he,
student.
he was a graduate in our class of 2022, and the class always nominates one of the students to speak on their behalf at the graduation, and Robert was that representative. So they refer to the guys in the prison system, a lot of times they call them Trinity guys. They're kind of known with some level of notoriety because we're the only bachelor's degree offered to incarcerated men in the state of Wisconsin. And so they have some level of notoriety. But here he is on this cell hall after graduation, and he was in the role of what they call a tier tender, which is you're kind of mopping the cell block, you're delivering trays to guys in their cells, because he was at a maximum security prison during COVID, which adds a whole nother layer to it. But he's mopping the cell doing his thing, and this guy's kind of heckling him, going like, Robert, like you're just like everybody else, man. You Trinity guys, you think you're better than me because you went to college, and here you are mopping floors just like everybody else. And Robert, in his wisdom that he gained through the program, said that what I heard him say was, tell me about your college education. And so instead of engaging in some level of back and forth in an argument, he just took time to share about the program, share about free college degree that he received that transformed his life through his faith and his education, and shared it with this guy. And while he's talking to this guy, there's other people around that are all listening to this conversation. And I don't know who they are. I don't know how they're transformed or if any of them have some level, like if it hits home. But I talked to Robert 3D last week, and he got a call 3 days ago from one of our graduates who's still incarcerated. And he said, you're never going to believe who's here at Fox Lake. And he goes, who? And he goes, that guy that used to make fun of you on the cell block, he's here at Fox Lake. And Robert was like, oh my goodness. And he goes, and guess what? He's thinking about applying to the program. And I told I was blown away when he told me that, because I said, Robert, you planted a seed 3 years ago when you treated that man with dignity and respect the same way you received it when you walked in the door. You planted a seed. And out of that, this guy is now considering to join the program, and you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that right there, right, is the fact that every person, it's a domino effect. It's a butterfly effect, right? That we talk about. It's that if that moment didn't happen, what else would it have led to? And when we talk about the power of education and reform and looking at these men, and yes, one of the most powerful things that I have also seen, whether it was Robert, whether it's been Adam, whether it was, Carlos, who I just introduced you to,
Yeah.
Carlos, right? And he was another podcast guest of mine, but each one of them has taken full accountability and ownership over what it is that they did and how they did cause harm. None of them are running from it. None of them are trying to hide it, suppress it, or ignore that fact. They recognize that, because I can see that people can have this internal conflicting feeling about how dare you treat this person as a human when they took another human's life away? How dare you do something and show compassion to these people who showed no compassion to anyone else, before, and what got them in there? How do you respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, what I've seen in the guys is the the gentleman who started, so our program is not the only of its kind. There's other states that do it, and the first of its kind was in Angola, Louisiana, or was Angola Prison in Louisiana. And the warden there, Burl Kane, described it that he said that the incarceration, the sentence is the punishment. You don't need to torture them. You don't need to make them as miserable as possible to add to the layers of what they're already experiencing, the charges that they have and they received. And I just come back to, at the end of the day, the question that our graduates are asked, or that the statement of every pair of eyes that you look into, is somebody made in the image of God. And whether you are there for egregious crimes or petty crimes or whatever it is, you still have two eyes. You're still very much made in the image of God. And it comes back to that first thing you said, that nobody is beyond redemption. I don't believe that. And our guys kind of are living examples of that. You have guys who haven't completed, some of them haven't ever completed really much of any education, and yet they come into the classroom and they graduate with honors. Robert is one of those guys. He said he was a habitual quitter, and he would self-sabotage to get kicked out so he didn't have to say that I quit. And yet somewhere along the way, there was this kind of moment that he described somewhere between his second and third year where he realized that was his pattern, and he decided to push through and completed and graduated with honors. And it's like, I don't know. I don't have a lot of, what's the word? I don't want to say patience for that level of a critique of human beings, but yeah.
Hi, so I'm pausing the episode for a quick moment and for a quick favor. If you haven't already, if you could just click subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, it would be really helpful. The only way we can know to make sure that we provide the right type of podcast episodes, the right type of guests, and to make sure that we're delivering the type of content that you actually want to hear, it's through your reviews and through your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode. I heard someone say this recently. I don't remember who it was, but someone had said this was actually about the death penalty. And it was about that even if someone was to get a death penalty, does it change anything in you? And a lot of times the families of the victims usually say no. It doesn't, because it doesn't bring that person back. It doesn't bring their family member back. It doesn't do anything in terms of like my emotional, state of being. And so to take someone else's life and torture them is not actually helping me at all. And so that is often what I hear in research that gets conducted around this, conversations with victim families and conversations with those that have, taken that accountability over their actions. But if we can take those same humans who, for whatever reason it was, either they grew up in a neighborhood where there was no way that they could not enter a gang. If they grew up in a neighborhood where every single person took pride in the fact that they had a family member that was in the system, or, whatever it may be. Or to your point, it's like you just got off the wrong tracks and unfortunately went down a wrong choice. But each one of those, unless you are a legitimate psychopath that has brain, like your brain
They
was,
exist.
which they exist, and we're not talking about them, right? We're talking about the
Correct.
individuals who were put into a circumstance, a predicament early in life that set them on a path that was unfortunate, and now they're landed here. And for them, if whether they're in society or whether they're stay in, but if they can actually get that dignity, that redemption, they can actually see themselves as more than that, they are worthy of, they're valuable. And Andrew, I kind of want to know from you is that I can only imagine that when their family members who are living in their communities and neighborhoods are seeing that, wow, my uncle who's 50 just got a college education and he's in there now changing these things. I'm not quitting high school anymore.
I mean, that's exactly the narrative that we saw recently at our third graduation. Was we had a gentleman, everybody's allowed to bring a number of family members in to participate in the graduation, at least in the audience. And there's a gentleman whose grandson came. And that was the first time his grandson had ever seen their grandfather. And the first time he sees him is walking across the graduation stage to receive his diploma. It's a cap gown. It looks like if you were to zoom in, you would think this is a college graduation on a college campus, but we're in the gymnasium of a prison. And that person is watching their grandfather walk across that stage and receive their diploma. And then they have conversations that are like, man, I'm getting my college degree in here. How's it your education going on the outside? You can do it. I can do it. I'm setting the example. And some of them are first generation individuals who go to college, and they're setting this, like, they're breaking this cycle, this family cycle of not going to college or not finishing their education. And what's crazy is they're doing it from in prison. It's like, that to me feels impossible. That feels like it shouldn't work that way. It should go the other way around. It should be the grandkid who's out in the community who's going to this school that gets out and breaks the cycle. But no, it's the uncle who's incarcerated for life who's breaking the cycle, and it translates out here.
It really is. It's one of those things, again, that going back to that same narrative of why we need to invest in people, period. It's not about, whether they are in prison, whether they're homeless, whatever it may be. It's like our duty as human beings and with morality is to help pick up that person and show them that, hey, I've got more means than I need. So why am I not now using that to help pick somebody up and be like, hey, let me help you cross that road. Let me help you
Yeah.
move to that other side that you see from your side, like, wow, what is that like? But they don't know how. You don't know what you don't know. And what you're providing through WIEA is an opportunity for these individuals to know that, like, oh, wait a second, there is another possibility. Because if you think you have no possibilities, then yes, you're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Yes. And another story from that graduation that I think speaks to what you were asking earlier about, like, taking responsibility. This individual in our graduating class had been telling everybody throughout his incarceration. He's starts off in the wrong direction and ends in the right direction. But he had been telling everybody throughout his incarceration that he was innocent.
I
He was
love the story,
incarcerated.
by the way.
He was incarcerated for crimes that he did not commit. And he's been telling everybody that, his family and so on and so forth. And somewhere through the program, they get to the part where, Jesus talks about the truth will set you free. And he realizes at this point, he had been applying to the innocence prior. I mean, he had been going through every possible avenue to get out. And through the program and through his faith, I mean, there's no other explanation for how somebody gets to this point, but he realizes he needs to tell the truth. So he tells everybody, stands up and tells the rest of the class that he's been lying to all of them. And he is incarcerated for what he did. He did what he's incarcerated for. And he said that I would rather be set free behind bars than get out on a lie. And I'm sitting there in this graduation, and I've got the Secretary of Corrections sitting next to me. And I'm like, I really hope that you're listening to this, because you can't legislate that transformation. You can't mandate it. That is somebody's heart that is transformed through their faith, that brings them to this awareness that I want to do the right thing. And what's even more difficult is I followed up with our psychology professor about this person, and now he's experiencing some isolation from his family because they're hurt by the fact that he didn't tell the truth. But once again, he comes back to that. He would rather be seen, known, and be truthful than live this double life and a lie. And it's like, that's the kind of powerful transformations that I'm like, that's what happens in the classroom. Sometimes it takes 4 years to get to that point, but nobody's beyond redemption. And our students are a living testament to that.
What is it about, you would say that these individuals who are going through that program, who are getting those transformations, and then when the few that do get to actually come back out to society, what have you seen in terms of that transformation and what they're able to then? We started this conversation with you mentioning how you went in thinking that you were there to teach, but you learned so much from them. What would you say that these individuals who go through your program and come out into society are now doing and able to do? And how are they transforming, whether it's their own family? Like, what have they shared with you that now their family is doing that they would have never done if it wasn't for this transformation that happened to them?
Yeah, I can think of two guys that one, I've talked to his mom and we shared some of her testimony on our social media. And she described like her son Derek. She's like, he's out, he's volunteering, he's involved in his church, he's giving back. And she said that we watched him do all these things and we said, why are we not doing those things? Why are we not helping in this way? Why are we not volunteering? And so just from a standpoint of loving your neighbor, that has translated to the families of our students who have been released, because they go through this education and they're communicating and they're corresponding and they do in-person visits. But it's one thing to talk about it while you're incarcerated. When you're released, that's really where the rubber meets the road to say, now you have a lot of options, a lot of distractions, a lot of things that can pull you away. Are you going to stay the course, or are you going to fall back into old habits? And this gentleman is one of those examples where he started those habits behind bars. Keep in mind, it's a 4-year education. So you have 4 years to like get these things ingrained into you in a way that they become routine and they become just the way you operate, the way you talk to other people, the way you engage in conversation and dialogue. And I think that translates to when they're released. Robert is another example of somebody who I think it was a nephew that was recently born, and they named that nephew after him. And they named him after him because of the person that he is. I don't know if it had anything to do with, I don't know what happened before, but the person that he is now, having since been released, the impact that he has on his family, like just the name. I've got to imagine that that child will grow up and will be told about who they're named after and what this person did and how they've impacted others. And those transformations are not like, it's almost overwhelming for me to be like, we can't possibly contain the transformations that happen in our students. I can't isolate it to just the prison. It's happening in the families, there's nothing we can do, whether it's happening in their church, whether it's happening in the community. It's like, it's this ripple effect that feels unstoppable in the best way possible. And Robert wants to start leading groups in his community of Bible studies for youth, because he's like, they need some direction, they need some guidance. And I would argue that like, I'm not the right person to do that because I don't know what it's like to be incarcerated. I don't know what it's like to grow up in the inner city, but Robert does. And Robert can meet them where they're at. And what he does, what our students do more than anything, whether it's in the prison, their families, or the community, is they provide an orientation. They don't tell the guys, here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4. They say, I'm over here. I've walked this road. Just look at me and keep walking that road. You might have some bends in the road and you might take some dips here and there, but just keep your eyes fixed on me and allow me to be that orientation to keep you going in the right direction.
I just honestly, it's mind boggling to me. And just, I get blown away every single time you share all of these stories. And again, having seen it for myself when I came out there, because especially with these inner city kids or at risk kids, it's that they aren't going to listen. They're at that teenage years. They're not listening to the parents. They're needing an external person who's going to show them. And to have someone who says, I've gone down the path that you think is cool. Let me tell you about it. And now let's help you course correct. That's something that actually in the episode with Carlos on Second Chances, he talked about. I went to dinner with Carlos and a few of his colleagues a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago now. And so Carlos has, all tats, like he's completely tatted up, right? But he's doing incredible work, doing leadership transformation work with companies, all of that. And I remember asking him that would he ever get rid of his tattoos? Would he
Hmm.
ever just completely go clean now that he's kind of working and speaking at corporate organizations and all this kind of stuff? And he said, absolutely not. And the reason why is because that is what builds trust with the kids. That's what builds trust with the community, that they see this and they see this as someone who has gone through that. And for him, each one of those has a story that has brought him to where he is today. And
Hmm.
so by having that and building that trust with these kids and with these at-risk kids or the mentorship that he does, it allows him to bridge the story between the version that he was to the version that he is today. And to your point of that bridge is that faith, that bridge is that education, that bridge is truly understanding the who of who I am in all of this. And this is where I will say that we talk a lot about in this country about prison reform, and we talk about redemption and reentry and all of these things. But there's such a fear in individuals who don't know about the prison system, or all the things that they know about the prison system is from CSI or like Prison Break, you know? And that is what they see, that is what they know. And so there's this bridge that hasn't really, it's still shaky. And
Hmm.
it's what we've got to really do is build that bridge between us on the outside, understanding how supporting this group of individuals who, yes, did things that were sinful or whatever it may have been, but
Yeah.
they are a human being who were just on the wrong side of the tracks. And just like you would want to protect your kid who potentially goes onto the wrong side of the tracks, the same way that people think about, well, the reason why I have to live in this neighborhood is because I want it to be safe for my kids. I want to make sure that they're around the right people, the right community. Why are we not offering that same level of compassion to individuals who didn't have that support system before?
I've seen that exactly because so I sit on the board of another nonprofit called Hope Through Restoration that does reentry housing. And the gentleman who leads that, LT Austin, he described that growing up, he said the guy walking or taking the bus with the lunchbox to go to work was looked at as kind of like a loser. And the guy who was selling drugs on the corner was the cool guy because he had the money and the girls and the cars and all this stuff. I want to be like that guy. And so it's like they were oriented, coming back to that orientation, they were oriented towards a lifestyle that was just more prevalent. And they got sucked up into all that. And that's where they end up. And it's like, how do you help them to have a different orientation? And I can't, I'll try to be an orientation, but we need lived experience individuals who have been impacted by the prison system to be the ones to lead the charge. I'll do my best to advocate and do things like this, but we need the people with lived experience that have successfully navigated reentry to share their wisdom with those who are either currently incarcerated or the youth who are on a path to end up incarcerated. And that's where I'm like, we do what we can in the small pocket of the world that we operate in. And I love when I hear stories of, like you said, Carlos and others who are doing that in those other places. And that's where the change happens.
You bring up that point, and it takes me back to when I used to be when I used to be a clinical therapist, and I was working in New York City, and I was doing home-based counseling. I had all different types of teenage kids. There was like Fiji Indian kids, there was Puerto Rican kids, white kids, black kids. It was only the black kids, only them. Nobody else. None of the other kids that I worked with would say this, but it was only the black kids who were like 15, 16. I will never forget it. They said, well, I'm black. I'm supposed to go to jail. And that it really knocks you, right? Is that
Yeah.
they know the penal code way better than they know their math homework. They
Hmm.
understand that better. And when this kid said that to me, that I'm black, I'm supposed to go to prison. And he said it so matter of fact. Like
Hmm.
this was it. there is no other option. This is what is supposed to happen. I already know my fate.
I remember talking to an individual that said he had dreams and he was 8 years old that he was going to be in prison. I mean, when I was 8, I can't think of ever having a dream that I was going to be incarcerated. That didn't even cross my mind. But it's like when you grow up in these communities that are just ravaged with all kinds of things, and there's beautiful stories happening in the midst of that, but they're in an environment where what's more prevalent and visible are the elements that are going to draw you into a system that at times doesn't help you to navigate your way to be transformed. And that's where we try to be at least an advocate in the area of transformation, to say that transformation is possible. And we believe it's through faith-based education. And there's success there, but it's a long road. And it's like, I don't think there's one silver bullet. I think it's a collection of variety of people approaching it from all the different angles that exist. And hopefully decades from now there'll be changes and we won't be able to say it was that one thing. Like it was WIEA, that was the thing. I'm like, no, we played a role, and there were 10, 20, 30 other people that played a role in that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When we talk about the entire system, like it really is a funnel that sadly has been created from the neighborhood. We know exactly, like I think of it as just like when people make business marketing funnels, when they make sales funnels, right? It's like this sadly has become a funnel where it's how do we, and especially because there are now prisons that are private prisons and there are judges that own prisons. Like it's become a whole disgusting, just unacceptable business essentially. But when there's people like you, when there's organizations like WIA, when there's, social work organizations, there's other organizations that are in there that are stepping in to saying like, no, we're going to prevent that from happening. Or no, we're going to prevent that person from getting a treatment that is just absolutely immoral. Or fine, they're in, but now, no, we're going to come in and we're going to provide them with the education so that when they leave, they don't get back stuck into that loophole. And so you're helping to break that cycle. And it's like there's a massive pie. And what we really, I keep saying this is because I so deeply believe it, is that even for myself, like someone who grew up in a very sheltered environment, and here I am going into some of the worst areas of New York City and working with them, if it was because I went into those neighborhoods that I got a real life awakening about what it is like to be in those environments. And the sad part is that me as a brown person, as an Indian girl, I was safer walking into those neighborhoods as a therapist because they knew that I don't necessarily belong in those neighborhoods. So they knew that if you're coming in, you must be a probation officer, you must be a school person, or you must be someone who's there to help. Versus one of my colleagues who was Black and who would walk into those neighborhoods, then they had to be even more extra cautious because it's like, wait, who are you? What are you
Mm-hmm.
doing? And so to your point, it takes every single one of us, but it's beyond also the people who are actively change makers like yourself that are doing good work for social causes. But it also requires us as society, as human beings, to change that perspective, to reframe our perspective on who is worthy and deserving of just basic humane compassion. And when we can change that, I think then we can make even a significant amount of progress.
And I think that's exactly it, is the bar for change and to have opportunity for us in our DNA is the bar is you're a human being made in the image of God. That's the bar that makes you eligible for the opportunities that we provide. There's no other bar. And when I think about the transformation and the changes and this, like, there's so many people all trying to do things. You do your part, and that's all you can do.
And
And
that
I
part
reckon,
can be just changing your perspective on, right, great. I'm glad that this person found their way. You would want to find, if you got lost, you want someone to help you find direction. And that is all that we can provide. Obviously, it is up to that person to take it and to run with it, but we can provide the opportunities. And that is something that you at WIA are just doing so profoundly.
well, and we're trying to do it. And I recognize, like, I'm a white man. Like, I'm stepping into spaces where I may be the minority. And I was at a conference and I went up to speak, and there's a whole table of guys who were formerly incarcerated. And they came up to me afterwards and they were like, "Man, I thought you were like a frat boy, like going up there to talk. And I was like, frat boy, like I won't be offended by what you just said, but keep going. And he goes, I thought you were just a frat boy. But then I heard you talk. And the more you talked, I realized that you have a heart for guys like us. And we need people like you doing this work. And then that's where it's like, so often you could think that I'm disqualified from those spaces because I fit the majority. But in reality, it's like, I have a part to play and you just got to step into that and listen. And I've started by listening to the guys, listening to the students, listening to those. And I think through that, I've gained a level of knowledge that helps me to meet people where they're at. But by no means am I ignorant of the fact that I'm a white man and I have stigmas that I have to overcome sometimes when I step into those spaces.
But the thing is that even you being a white man in this space allows you to then bridge that between those groups and to the individuals who are going to listen to you because you are a white man.
True. It's true.
So I again, our conversations always go on for hours, but sadly we have a limit here. But I do want to end it with asking you if you could reframe one thing about how we think about incarceration and redemption in this country, what would that be?
Hmm. I would say that it's gonna kind of echo everything else that I've said so far, but just because you're incarcerated does not mean that you are unworthy of education. It does not mean that you are beyond redemption. It means that you made mistakes and you have opportunities in front of you. And that's the perspective that I have. And I think that many people have, or the perspective I used to have, is that people are incarcerated. Like I was going to school to be a cop. I mean, that's what I was going to school for.
Wait, how did we not lead with this?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I literally, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and I was applying to be a police officer. And that was the path I was on. And now here I find myself on the other side. Not that there's, good, bad, but I'm on the other side of saying that I was going to be responsible for putting these people there, rightfully, wrongly, whatever. And now here I am trying to uplift these guys to provide second chances and opportunities for transformation. And so, in some ways, my perspective has been reframed more than anything by experiencing the humanity within these guys and within our students. That's what drew me in the first place was the humanity of these guys, their faith that they found in the midst of their circumstances. And if I allowed the sentence, if I allowed the title of formerly or actively or formerly incarcerated to override all those other things, I would have none of the stories. I wouldn't be in this position. And so for me, the reframing of the perspective came by seeing the humanity in the person above everything else.
So much compassion, so much empathy, and so much accountability in every single thing that you're doing at WIEA, that your students like that I met, like Robert, and I met LT when we went to that experience where everyone's came together. And so thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing all of this with the listeners, because I think it's so important that we really do reframe a perspective around what it means to see compassion in those that have been incarcerated. So thank you so much. How can someone get involved? How can someone support WIA's mission? How can someone learn and connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, our website, which I'm sure you'll link in the bio,
Yeah,
the
everything will be
website
linked.
the website has a lot of the information in terms of like what we do. The challenge we always have is people want to volunteer, and unfortunately, like unless you have the credentials to teach at a college level, we don't have a need for volunteers. But we have prayer signups for people to pray for a week over the program. And the way I always explain it is that you might think that like the dollar, like it seems cliche to be like, well, financial support is the thing, but like genuinely, like the education costs money. And the reason that we're able to provide it is because it's free to the students because it's paid for by donors and individuals. And so the financial support genuinely makes a difference and you can measure it. I mean, you can measure the cost of tuition for a student for a year is about $8,500. I mean, I can tell you that. And so it's like, you can support it and know that like, yeah, you're not going to have the student's name, but you're going to know that you're going to support this student. And there might be stories that I tell on future things that you made possible. And I'm sorry that you can't put your name on it to know that that was the person you supported, but transformations happen. And if that's what you care about, that's a way that you can make it possible.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrew. This was absolutely lovely to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Pyle. It's exciting to have an opportunity to like share with you and partner with you in what you're doing with this podcast.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode. And I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.